Good evening. I'm David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, and I'm pleased to welcome you this evening to the William G. McGowan Theater here at the National Archives. Whether you're here in the theater or joining us on our YouTube station, welcome, and a very special welcome to our C-SPAN viewers. Tonight's program, Catch the Wave, Voter Discontent During Wave Elections, is presented in partnership with the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress, and we thank them for their support. And I noticed that Barbara Keneally, former president of the association, is with us this evening. Welcome back. It's nice to see you. Before we hear from our panelists, I'd like to tell you about two other programs that are coming up here in this theater. On Thursday, November 1st at 7 p.m., a panel of combat photographers who served in Vietnam as part of the Army's Special Photographic Office will discuss their role and their work. The program is presented in partnership with the U.S. Army Center for Military History in observance of the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. And on Wednesday, November 7th at noon, author Eric J. Dolan will be here to tell us about his new book, Black Flags, Blue Waters, The Epic History of America's Most Notorious Pirates. A book signing will follow the program. Check our website at archives.gov or sign up at the table outside the theater to get email updates. You'll also find information about other National Archives programs and activities. And another way to get more involved in the National Archives is to become a member of the National Archives Foundation. The foundation supports all of our education and outreach activities. Every 2 years, elections create some turnover in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Sometimes it's slight, and other years it's a wave. Whether the turnover is large or small, incoming new members are eager to learn the ropes and get seats on prime committees where the day-to-day processes of legislation occur. The records created by these committees, House, Senate, and joint committees, make up a large portion of the records here in our Center for Legislative Archives. These documents give us insight into how laws are made and why they are written as they are. Though the balance of power may tip toward one party or the other, the National Archives maintains its mission to ensure that the permanent records of the House and the Senate are cared for and preserved for future generations to study. To start off our discussion of wave elections, we'll turn to Peter M. Weiklein, who has served as the Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress since 2003. The association celebrates bipartisanship, a collaborative approach to legislating and reconnecting citizens with their representative governments. He plans and directs all policies, objectives, and initiatives for the association, represents the FMC in the community, and serves as its spokesperson to the public, the media, and Congress. Mr. Weiklein holds 2 BAs from Pennsylvania State University. He attended law school at the Free University in Berlin and completed his legal studies in Washington, D.C. at Catholic University, Columbus School of Law. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Peter Weiklein.
Thank you, David, for this very kind introduction, and thank you also for the many, many years of our highly productive partnership. We appreciate it. Along with David, I want to welcome our audience here at the National Archives tonight, as well as those watching us via the live stream and on C-SPAN. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of the Former Members of Congress Association, I am thrilled to introduce our panel tonight. But before I do so, let me spend a couple of minutes on the work of the association. FMC is the premier nonprofit focused on the work of Congress, involving former members as well as current members of Congress in our programs on a bipartisan basis. We offer to current members and current congressional staff the opportunity to work together across the aisle on issues before the Congress. We also have a number of international legislative exchanges in which current members and current staff can participate, again on a bipartisan basis. And we view it as our mission to bring the public together with current and former members of Congress for a productive and pragmatic discussion about the issues that affect us all. In addition, we have a number of nationwide programs that aim to bolster civic education and reconnect the next generation with their role as citizens. Please visit our website at usafmc.org to find out more about the organization and our work. Our many panels with the National Archives fall under the umbrella of engaging the public and exploring more in depth how our representative democracy functions. Certainly, there is no more basic component of a functioning democracy than voters expressing their opinion during an election, and clearly our next election, the midterms on November 6th, will be now no exception. We therefore thought it would be interesting to examine what past wave elections have in common and what the past might tell us about the future. To do so, we have assembled an outstanding panel of experts, including a bipartisan group of former members of Congress who either were swept into office during a wave election or were swept out by one. I will now ask our panelists to join me on stage, and please hold your applause until I've introduced them all. John Ashford is a political consultant and chairman and CEO of the Hawthorne Group, bringing to this panel decades of experience running campaigns, forecasting election outcomes, and commenting on today's politics. Anne-Marie Burkle was elected to the House as a Republican from upstate New York in 2010 and served until 2013. Since February of 2017, she's the acting chair of the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. Jim Blanchard served in the House of Representatives as a Democrat from Michigan, coming into Congress with the Watergate class and serving from 1975 until 1983. Following his service on Capitol Hill, he served 2 terms as governor of Michigan, and in 1993, President Clinton appointed him U.S. ambassador to Canada. Tom Davis represented Northern Virginia as a Republican in the House from 1995 until 2008. In addition to high-level committee assignments such as chairing the Committee on Government Reform, he served as chairman of the National Republican Congressional Committee from 1998 until 2002. Marjorie Margolis was elected to Congress as a Democrat from Pennsylvania in 1992, but was swept out of office by the Republican Revolution of 1994. She now teaches at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia and remains politically active, especially on women's rights issues. And to moderate our conversation, we're thrilled to have secured the services of David Hawkins. David is a journalist focused on politics in Congress. He has served as editor of the Congressional Quarterly and of Roll Call, has written extensively on this subject, and is a regular commentator on channels including Fox News, CNN, NPR, and MSNBC. Let's please welcome our panel to the stage with a round of applause.
Gosh, such comfy chairs. We were told to not move from our chairs, so don't expect us to move from our chairs. Hi, I'm David Hawkins. Welcome. Glad you all are here on this cold night. This is your time as much as it is our time, so we are going to make sure to reserve the last half an hour of our time together for questions. I can see one mic. Oh yeah, so there's mics in the corners, and when it becomes time for questions, if you guys would make use of those mics, because we are being taped. We're being live streamed and taped. So just asking your question from your seat will not do the audience out there in cyberspace and on C-SPAN any good. So thank you to the former members of Congress and to the National Archives and to our panelists even before they've said what they're going to say. I thank them for carving out time for this. This was arranged a long time ago in American political life, which is to say several weeks ago, and we even had our sort of pre-conference. You've been on a panel, that everybody gets together on a conference call about 2 days out, and even that seems like a long time ago in our political life. Sadly, our political life has been sort of rocked anew by another round of potential violence today. So that's sort of a surprise that none of us knew about. So when the former members and the archives got together to talk about voter discontent in a wave election year, I think the supposition was it's going to be a wave election year. And now I'm guessing that from sizing these folks up in the green room, that maybe they're going to disagree with that.
Not me.
Not you. Okay, there you go. Incredibly, they represent sort of the academic and consultancy view, and then, believe it or not, and I think Peter might have mentioned this, each of them was brought in by a different wave election, and some were taken out by other wave elections. They represent all four of the most gnarly waves of the last half century, which I guess I get to say because I get to cover three of the four. I wasn't around for Watergate, but I was around for the other three. So let's get going. So, Mr. Ashford, set the stage. So here's what we want to do. We want to talk about, will there be a wave? 13 days out. Can we finally say, will there be a wave? If so, why? If not, why not? What is a wave anyway? And once the wave has crashed, what good is it? So those are my premise for my questions. But you take it away. You take the lead, and then we're going to want to hear from each of our four former members about their life surfing.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you to the former members and to the archivists for having us. Governor, Mr. Chairman, Congresswoman, as the technician on this panel of distinguished elected officials, i.e. I'm the hired help, let me start with your middle question, David, which is, what is a wave? I'm not sure how applicable in this presidency the lessons of history are. This president has rewritten history more than Thucydides did. But Ballotpedia looked at 50 elections, the two-year House cycle over the last 100 years, and said 20% of them, 10 elections out of 50, were waves. They defined it as the party out of power gaining more than 48 seats. Amy Walters with Charlie Cook, with credit to Nat Cohn, put it, I think in more realistic terms, that a wave election today is 35 or more seats, and the party wins the competitive seats by a large margin. To give you a historical context, and some of us were in the public arena back in the Watergate years and even earlier, David, I don't go quite back to the two great wave elections that were presidential waves. FDR following Hoover in 32, the Republicans lost 97 seats, almost a quarter of the Congress. And then Harding after Wilson in 20, the Democrats lost 59 seats. The midterm elections, now we're talking about the Democrats need 23 seats. Will they get 25, 27, 30? I don't think anybody's predicting much more than that right now. Harding in 22 lost 76 seats. FDR, after the court packing attempt, lost 70 seats in 38 and control. Obama in 10 lost 63 seats and control. Truman in 46 lost 54 and control. Clinton in 94 lost 54 seats and control. Hoover in 30 lost 53 seats in control. FDR in the first year of World War II in 42 lost 50 seats. LBJ in 66 lost 48 seats. And Ford in 74, his first midterm, would have been the second of the Nixon two terms, lost 48 seats. We're certainly not going to see a wave of that magnitude. If you look at the 13 non-presidential elections going back over 52 years, I think this is the most important statistic to come out of polling today. Anytime the president's job approval has been below 50%, the party has lost an average of 40 seats. LBJ was sitting at 49% approval in 66, lost 47. Ford was at 47, lost 48. Even the great Ronald Reagan was sitting at 43% approval, lost 26 seats. Clinton was at 46 approval in 94, lost 52 in control. Bush down to 39% by 2006, lost 30 seats. Obama was at 45 and 10, lost 63 seats in control, and he was at 42% 4 years later and lost 13 seats. Trump is probably sitting at 43, 44, 45% approval right now. Based on those last 13 non-presidential elections, the Republican Party should expect to lose, by these numbers, an average of 40 seats, but I think we'll lose in the upper 20s, and you'll see a blue wave in the House.
Here we go. All right, that sets the stage. Now let's, before we get really going, it's time for 4 little history lessons, and we'll take them in chronological order, starting from the first. Before Mr. Jim Blanchard was our ambassador to Canada, before he was 2-term governor of Michigan, he was a beneficiary of the Watergate wave. And of the 4 of you, you got swept into office with by far the largest percentage of the vote. So landslide, Jim Blanchard, explain to us.
I love waves. I benefited from 2 and I survived 1. But in 1974, in 1972, the night of the election where McGovern got wiped out by President Nixon, I knew the next time out would probably be a good time for Democrats because it was going to be 6 years into the incumbent president's term. And I started planning my congressional campaign that very night at 4 in the morning. Because from the time I was 14 years old, I wanted to serve in Congress, deal with world affairs, deal with government. I was hooked on it as a child. And so I started planning my campaign. And so in those days, you didn't declare right away, and I couldn't because people would think it was a joke. I was too young.
32.
So, but at the time, I was 30 planning this thing.
Planning
so,
this, right.
so anyway, so I had it all figured out. You know, this is going to be a good Democratic year. We're 6 years going to be into Nixon's term. There's one problem that happened, which was things got so bad, you know, a year later, that all of a sudden everybody was talking about running, and I was worried about a big primary. It was going to be a primary, but I was worried about it. And then Gerald Ford's seat in a special election flipped to a Democrat, the first Democrat, Richard Van der Veen, in decades, was going to represent Grand Rapids, the Ford seat, because Ford now president. And then all of a sudden another one flipped in Pennsylvania, and another one in Michigan. These are special elections. So you couldn't hold anybody back. Everybody, at least in Michigan, wanted to run. So I was trying to manage the primary field. So I mounted this campaign. I wasn't running against Nixon. I was running on the bread and butter issues. I could see that the animus toward Nixon was going to work in my favor, and I really didn't want to go out and tell people I'm running against Nixon because people were so upset. They didn't need to be reminded.
Was Robert Huber, you're the guy you ran against, was he a Nixon loyalist?
Yeah, he was supporting Nixon, and people didn't like that, of course. I knew it was going to help me, but again, I was running on, you know, the price of bread and milk and Great Lakes water quality and jobs. So I had this all figured out, and I won the primary narrowly. I thought everything is going to be great, and then Nixon resigns. I go, oh no! And then Ford's president from Michigan. I'm going, oh no! He's popular. They're rallying around him. He's a decent, honorable man. I go, oh my God. Things got so bad, they got better for the Republicans. And then a few days later, he names Rockefeller as his running mate, a moderate Republican. I'm going, oh no! Oh, this is really going to... I still think I'm going to win, but, you know, I don't know about that. So then, a couple of weeks later, I'm driving along campaigning, and the radio comes on and says, and late-breaking news. President Gerald Ford has pardoned Richard Nixon. I'm going, yes, yes, I'm going to win. And so it was a great campaign. I thought we'd win by 53 or 54%. We got 59 to 40, so it was a 19-point spread. And then we came here. There were like 40. There were 76 new Democrats came. 49 replaced Republicans, I think. 17 new Republicans. So it was an incredible time and a moment. And but I really did believe that I would win because of the timing. I didn't think it would be that big of a wave.
Right.
Nor in 1980, when I was now a popular congressman, my numbers dropped 9 points. And I didn't expect it because Reagan had the wave in 1980 over Jimmy Carter. So, and then I got elected governor in 82, and there was a big wave for Democratic governors in 82. So I'll stop now. But in 1980, I never sensed there was a wave for Reagan. I didn't sense it. In 74, I did sense it. But you just don't know sometimes until the morning after.
So hold that thought, because I do want to ask about your time coming to Congress is when polling was very different than it is now. So I'm sort of interested to your gut. So think about that. So now we fast forward to 1992, which was, it was a wave because it was the year, it was an anti-incumbent year, kind of, is my memory. And it would, but you didn't have that, but you did have your gender working for you. And you finished in third place. You are of the margins of victory, 1,373 votes to win an open seat. So congratulations on that. And what?
Yeah.
How did you?
Yeah.
How did? What was your wave experience like?
I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, oh my God, my story is so pathetic. I mean, it really is.
Well, I'm glad we asked you to be with us.
In the interest of full disclosure, I have a ridiculous number of children, and I had always said to them, you got to be prepared to lose before you can win. And I had a very unusual group of women, let me tell you, come and say, would you run? And I had a job that I kind of liked, and I so had to give up as a reporter, and that means you really have to give it up.
Yes.
And this was a Republican district. I would like to say the most Republican district represented by a Democrat in the country at the time.
Hadn't elected a Democrat since World War I learned.
And he, the pathetic guy, also did a drive-by. He stayed in for one election. And it never entered my mind that I would win. I mean, ever. I never let myself even emotionally get down there on the train. I never thought that I would win. I only went into election night with a concession speech. And it was just truly. So it was the year of the woman, which lasted for 365 days. So I went in. I went in with one wave, and then went out with Newt, and the contract on America.
Yes.
So I did a drive-by. That was it. I'm awfully glad I did it. It was a very, very strange experience. Very. I went in the wave, and I do see, and we'll get to this. I'm working with a lot of the women in suburban women who are running, and Pennsylvania is very underrepresented by women. I was the first woman elected in her own right in the state's history. Several women in the 30s had followed their husbands after they died. So it's like 47th or something with regard to representation down ballot, which I'd love to talk about because I think this is very important. But now we have, from my area, we have 4 women who I'd say one, I don't know, but 3 are definitely going to win. From changing what our congressional delegation.
Wave or no wave,
like.
they're going to win.
But I do think, and I know this is not your question.
Okay.
But I don't care.
That's okay.
No, I do think, I think this is going to be a wave. I think it's not going to be as dramatic as, I want your numbers. Can I take your numbers? I definitely think what's happened, the women have really said, we're going to get there. I mean, and we were talking about this earlier. I think what we're seeing is this anamnestic response. We don't know how to, we didn't know how to, it's that kind of first, how do you deal with this? The second wave, the second bee sting is, because so many of us have gone through so many of us didn't know how to handle that power thing as we were, I'm old enough to know how crazy it is if you are in a situation like that. I think women are going to get out and vote in numbers that are going to be, I hope, astonishing. And so, and I think that it's going to count, but I don't know.
Huh. So your one term did not overlap with the man to your right who came in on the Newt wave. And when did you, and you also defeated an incumbent Democrat?
I did.
And when did you know you were coming to Congress?
A third of us lost, though.
I defeated one of the girls that came in '92.
Yes.
Yeah.
A third of the women, that's interesting. One third of the women who were swept in by the year of the woman.
Well, we most came from marginal districts. Women run or have traditionally run as well as men do when there's an open seat.
Right. Did you run because of Clarence Thomas? Does that have anything to do with it?
Oh, man. It really did have...
Okay.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
She just came to speak at Penn, Anita Hill. There's no question about it. I mean, she really did energize, and I think in the same way that Kavanaugh is energizing, I mean, I think not helping the Senate, but definitely helping the House seats, especially
Kavanaugh
women.
is helping the Senate. It depends which, from my perspective.
Take it away, Mr. Davis. So tell us about your, when did, you were a political, of
By the way,
of
I
the
love
four of
this
you,
guy.
I think you were
This guy is the best.
the best known political geek. So when did you know, how did you know there was a wave and that you were going to benefit from it?
I knew there was a wave about 11 p.m. on election night.
Okay.
True story. First of all, I was a political junkie. My high school years, I was 4 years as a page in the U.S. Senate. So I went to high school from 6 to 10 every morning and then worked in the Senate. Got a full scholarship to Amherst, where I was president of the Young Republicans. That's where I got to meet your friend David Eisenhower.
Right. I teach with David Eisenhower, and so we
know each other. Yeah, we have a history. Then I worked in the Nixon White House. Went to the University of Virginia Law School, again was president of the Young Republicans, came back up to Fairfax at the age of 29, got elected to the county board, then to chairman of the county board, which is our equivalent of county executive or mayor. And then a new district gets created in 92, but I'd just been elected chairman of the board. I couldn't run. Leslie Byrne wins the seat. It was a pretty neutral district, maybe a slight Democratic lean, but it was a pretty close district. And so in 94, this was my shot, and I took it. And I thought I had a good shot of winning until the Republicans nominated their Senate candidate that year against Chuck Robb. They nominated a guy named Oliver North. North ran a very competitive race against Robb statewide, but in my district, he got 29% of the vote. I had a more urban district, and he was absolutely radioactive. When Oliver North came to Fairfax, you couldn't find me with a search warrant. I mean, it was, I had to run my own race and just put my independence. I had help from John Warner, who had not endorsed North, saying, putting the independent seal of approval. I had a record as head of the county government, and I had the Washington Post endorsement, which also helped in terms of my independent bona fides. And on election night, Oliver North gets 29%, and I come in at 54%.
You did sign the contract, but with your fingers.
I didn't sign the contract. She said the contract on America. I signed the contract for America. Very.
spare me.
Yeah, in fact, the way this works is, I just said, you know, what do I know? I'm a local government guy. I'm a political junkie. He said, sign it. So we signed it. The first week, members came to Washington, and reporters would come up and say, can you give me the 10 items in the contract for America? And
No.
they named 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
So they started to make these little cards, and we hung them around our breasts so we could come up and read them, to tell you. But no, I didn't know till 11 o'clock on election night when I got home we'd taken
But that's
the House.
a huge margin. Come on.
Because I was so Oliver North had swallowed up basically all the oxygen in the race, and I was kind of running against the stream. In the district next door, the Republicans did 5 points worse, and they had a 92. In the urban district in Norfolk, the same thing. North was a more rural-based camp, very popular out in the rural areas. I just didn't have any of them in my district. So my conclusion at the end of it is that voters who voted, they wanted to cast a protest vote against somewhere, against Clinton. But they didn't find North an appropriate vehicle, so they came back for me.
It wasn't you don't buy that it was a nationalized election and the contract with America was what galvanized the voters?
Well, I'll tell you what Contract America, from my perspective, is that I knew Leslie had a ton of money, and she was going to hit me on something. And she hit me on signing the contract with America, and nobody understood the damn thing.
Okay.
So when she hit me on that, I felt like they have missed it. I was vulnerable on a lot of other issues, and they hit me on that, and nobody understood what it was. Didn't do a thing.
So then you're gone from the House again by the time Chairwoman Burkle gets elected in 2010.
Well, I survived 86.
Yes, you did.
86.
2006.
I mean, 2006.
Yes. How'd you do that?
2006. I've been running. My re-elections were, mid 60s, percentage-wise. My polling comes back in January of 2006. We always ran it against the strongest Democrat in the district. I'm beating him, but I'm at 51%. And I'd had one of my best legislative years ever. And I said to my pollster, what's going on? He said, it's the environment, Tom. They hate Bush. Bush was at a 29% approval rating. So I spent I had warning. I spent the next few months basically making sure that I was talking to all the swing groups and making sure that I was putting my coalition together, I ended up winning with 56%. My Senate candidate, George Allen, running for re-election, was 42%. So I got a good ticket split, but I saw it coming and was able to position myself on the issues accordingly. Again, that year they cast their protest vote with Allen, but they were able to come back to me. We also had the benefit of earmarks, which were a big deal. When I walk around Fairfax, I wasn't Tom Davis, I was Mr. Woodrow Wilson Bridge. And so even voters who may not like my party saw some redeeming qualities in me to keep me
Does
around.
Barbara Comstock have your district now?
No. She's got the Republican, she got a district I would have killed for. My district was a lot tougher, but what's happened is she doesn't have earmarks. She doesn't have earmarks. So these races are now parliamentary races. And in the old days, you take away earmarks, that's the one way members could personalize their districts. When the Republican Congress decided they weren't going to designate projects and they were going to let President Obama designate projects, that was the beginning of the end. They took basically their best tool away, and that's going to come back to haunt them this year.
Well, that's a perfect segue to Ms. Burkle, because the previous Republican in her seat was an earmarker extraordinaire. I'm guessing you ran against earmarks.
Right? Yeah.
You ran against earmarks. You ran against Obama. Tell us about your 648 vote triumph over the wave. On the wave.
So I was 2010, and that was the year. Was obviously President Obama's first term. And we had a number of things. First of all, I was busy in a job. I was Assistant Attorney General, minding my own business. But I realized that the Democrat didn't have an opponent. And I thought to myself, that's just not right. Now, I will say this about our district. So I do think that 2010 and the 63 Republicans that went into the House in 2010, I do think that was a wave. But I don't think my race was a part of the wave, because, as you mentioned, I won by 682 votes, and it wasn't decided until maybe 14 days after the election, election night. So I didn't give a speech other than stay tuned. So that's how it was. But so I was in my job as Assistant Attorney General. I spent my whole professional career in healthcare one way or another. So I decided the Affordable Care Act was the last straw for me. So I threw my hat into the ring, but I did not have a political organization. I didn't have funds. I didn't have anything. And you can imagine going to the powers that be in the district and in the counties and the state party and, get one eye roll after another after another. No woman had ever held that seat. So it was a big deal. But I think for the district at that time, they were looking for jobs and they were looking for an improvement in the economy. Upstate New York suffered greatly when, as Tom mentioned, when Jim Walsh was there for 20 years, he brought back a lot of money to the district. Well, that dried up, and that's no longer something you can do. So anyway, that's kind of, and I think the people in the district were looking for, that's what was most important to them, jobs in the economy. And they saw the Affordable Care Act, they saw Dodd-Frank, they saw a lot of things that were sucking energy out of the economy. And so I think what we saw in 2010 in my district was they were going to try something else. And it was pretty much the way it is now. It was essentially running against Nancy Pelosi. I mean, that was sort of the mantra in 2010. She had been the speaker, and so that was sort of a common theme we all had. But I wouldn't consider my own election a part of the wave. I do think, though, there was that wave in 2010 in reaction to that whole laundry list of things that had gone on in the House that really weren't, and I contrast that with today, because I think now, despite the fact whether you like Trump or not, if you've got more money in your bank account, if there's jobs, if unemployment is lower, if the GDP is at a growth rate of 4.2%, it's hard to ignore all of that, because I think that is the issue that transcends gender. It transcends everyone. I think it affects every American. And so I'll be interested to see how that is interpreted during this election, because conceivably it should be a wave, first term President Trump.
Would you call it a wave in 12 when you got taken out? Or no? Or why did you lose in 12?
No, I think that in my district, President Obama was so strong, there was no way I could beat that voter turnout for the 2012 election. You
look like you wanted to ask a question. No. So having set that stage, then early lightning round. So you say it's a wave. The other ones say it's not a wave. It's a wave, it's not a wave. What we're
Well,
looking at in 13 days. You think it's a wave. You think the Democrats will win the House by?
I think the Democrats will win the House by 35.
By 35 or to pick up 35
Pick up
seats?
35, yeah. Pick up 35 seats. But honestly, I mean,
Okay.
I'm so bad at this.
All right.
I was such a bad politician. I mean, I'm so bad at this, so don't listen to me.
Okay.
Well, that's
Well,
good.
I knew her when I was in Congress. She was a newscaster, right?
Right, yeah. But
So-
I mean, as
Here in D.C., not
as
in Philadelphia,
Shakespeare
not in
says, I
Pennsylvania.
suck it. No, I mean, truly. I don't know, but I can
Okay.
bloviate the way everybody else
No,
does.
don't blow it. So,
Speculate is a better word.
Governor Blanchard, what do you think?
I think it won't be a big wave. I think the Democrats will get control of the House by a measurable
Senate,
amount.
yeah.
I think the wave will be governors, starting by the way, in Michigan
Yeah, I
with
agree.
Gretchen Whitmer. So I think we're going to pick up quite a few new governors. That'll be a building block for the future. And certainly we're not going to get control of the Senate. And by the way, I think the big loser with the Kavanaugh hearings was the U.S. Senate and how they looked.
And women in this running.
Yeah, but yeah, and I think we'll elect a couple, maybe 2, possibly 3 women in the House in Michigan. And we'll re-elect Debbie Stabenow by more than 25 points. That's Michigan. But I think there'll be I don't see it as a big wave. I do want to answer one question, the one you asked. Do waves matter? If you look at the 1964 election of Lyndon Johnson, which was a wave, gave us Medicare, Medicaid, voting rights, civil rights, PBS, and a lot of other, from my point of view, really good things for our country. That wave mattered.
That wave mattered.
Can I add
Yes.
something? I think that the wave that we may see will be in down ballot races. In a state like North Carolina, where most of the legislative races go unchallenged, there is not one now that isn't challenged, mostly by women, many teachers. I don't know the exact number, but it's quite extraordinary. And I think that, and we're seeing that in Pennsylvania, it's the same thing. Right outside of Philadelphia, there are 12 women running for legislative office, 3 for state senate. About half will win. Very important for redistricting, very important. But it's also it's what's happening with that kind of wave and how you see. I mean, I see it as a parent that these women are getting in and their families are getting involved, their children are getting involved. It's the beginning of something that is a serious change, and I think a lot of it has to do with what Democrats classically are not interested. Down ballot race is very, very important, and I think a lot of women who never would have thought of getting into politics are now doing it.
With hundreds in Michigan. But what's your prediction? He's a political junkie.
Tom.
Well, let me talk. It's a midterm. I chaired the campaign committees, in a presidential and
Right.
off year. The president's party has lost seats
Always,
in
yeah,
midterms,
almost.
35 of 38 of the midterms. I was chairman of one of those 3 exceptions. I always like to add, but it wasn't because of me. There were some extenuating
shucks.
factors. But I'll take credit. Now, look, there are 3 factors that go into midterm elections that generally help the out party. Often when a president wins, they bring people in on their coattails, and then when in the midterm, these members have to survive on their own. The best way is to call, for example, there were Obama-centric voters. When President Obama was on the ballot, they came out. They elected him in 2008 and 2012. But they didn't show up in the off years. So that diminished the turnout. Secondly, the out party is generally more juiced. They are more enthusiastic. You certainly saw this your year when you were elected. I think all of you in waves, the out party is more enthusiastic, and we have seen that consistently through this cycle until Kavanaugh and the caravan and these things. That's starting to equal out. The enthusiasm gap, which has swept the Democrats have picked up several Republican-held House seats, dozens of Republican-held state legislative seats over the last year because their turnout model was much higher because their enthusiasm was higher. That's now equaling up a little bit. But there's a third factor that helps the Democrats this year because they're the out party, and that is that independent voters who really don't like either party they tend to use this opportunity to balance government, to put a check on the president, put some guardrails on the president rather than giving him a blank check. And I think even as the Republican enthusiasm gap has gone up, we have seen the independents move a little more into the Democratic column. Now,
In addition,
yeah.
I mean, especially for the people whom I have conversations with, the tone is a little frightening. And we were talking about this earlier. The words that are being thrown into the ozone, for me, are frightening.
But you're in a Philadelphia, metro
Bubble.
Philadelphia
Yeah.
bubble. As I said, in my neighborhood 2 years ago, if you put up a Trump sign, it was a hate crime. But if you went out 40 miles, people were making their own Trump signs and putting them in their yard. It's a very polarized country.
It was in Michigan.
And so when you start talking
It's
about
becoming more
waves,
polarized,
there will be waves in some areas, in metro areas in particular, college towns in
Suburban,
particular, yeah. But you go out in the country, there may be a red undertow to that wave.
And I want to comment on what Tom's saying, because I think we living in a bubble here in Washington
No
or
question
the
about
cities,
it, yeah.
we have no idea. When I travel for my current job, we travel through the country. There's a different enthusiasm, a different set of priorities, and it's
And a
very
different anger. I mean,
almost
it's a different-
unrelated
yeah.
to what goes on here in Washington.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of this wave, I think it's going to be much closer. The Kavanaugh vote, I think that whole Kavanaugh experience really, to Tom's point, raised the energy of the Republican Party. Kind of a preview of what would happen if the Democrats took over. And so I do think a lot of the races that were absolutely not winnable are now much closer than they were. And I think whether or not the Democrats will actually take over the House, I think it's going to be a much more narrow win than was previously thought. And I will say this.
2 weeks ago, I mean, or even 3 weeks ago, it was a different equation.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I will say, in this environment, no one knows from day to day what's going to affect.
You really don't know till that night or the morning after on these waves. It's
Yeah.
very hard. I mean, as I said, I predicted my first one, but the others, I couldn't. I will say this, though, that I do believe the intensity of women is still underestimated. I believe that.
It's extraordinary, honestly, because I've been out there, and it's amazing. Now, obviously, I'm in a bubble, but
But I think it is extraordinary. And the other thing I've noticed in Michigan is that there are a number of women I've met, and candidates as well, who 10 or 20 years ago would have been running as moderate Republicans, see no place in the Republican Party for them. Mm-hmm. Now, it's offset by some other things, perhaps, but not entirely. And they could have easily been moderate Republicans. Some of them are actually running for Congress in Michigan, and I think they're going to win. And
as Republicans
it's
or
not just
Democrats?
As Democrats, or
they're going to win as Democrats.
Yes, I mean,
They're going to win as
The
Democrats.
tale
Yep.
in Michigan is that Oakland County, the more affluent county that you
Yeah, right.
represented,
Yeah.
has really moved to the Democratic side. And Macomb County, which was the heart of the Democratic Party, has
now
moved more Republican.
Yes, but the interesting thing statewide is this, and I've learned it and practiced it. That is, you can win Oakland by more than you lose Macomb and be governor or a senator. And the independents
But
in
I think
Michigan
what
are
you're saying is
today are
interesting.
going for the Democrats, and it may be what you're saying, Tom. That it's the independents, but all these experts say the red voters are getting more red and the blue are getting more
But
blue.
Rockefeller
It's hard for us to
Republicans
know
rip on
what's really going to
Republicans.
happen.
I think,
Go ahead.
I think if I had to characterize a wave this year, as Congresswoman Margoli said, it would not be a blue wave, it would be a pink wave. It is the women that, I look down ballot in Missouri. There's only one statewide election. 2 women are running for state auditor. Second, and I've got to credit Charlie Cook with this observation. It's hard to talk about a wave when it appears that the Senate and the House races are happening in two different universes.
Yeah.
Third,
Yeah.
I am seeing, as Chairman Davis said, we're seeing, particularly in some governor's races, it tightened down. The Democrats should have put the New Mexico governor's race away in August, and she's in a lot tougher race than she should be. Nevada's right on the bubble. I mean, I can go sort of state by state there. It's hard to call.
do you attribute, how much of this do you attribute, or do any of you attribute to the president's rebound. I mean, somebody said 43. I think he said 47 in the
47
3-day
is
rolling average.
40, about 45.3 and real clear tonight.
But never higher. That's his peak. I mean, that's higher than election day.
He has rebounded some. This caravan coming up through Mexico could have a profound effect on who goes and votes and how they vote. It's a volatile electorate.
But there is the desire for check and balance, and there is the trend when there's a president of one party to elect the governor of the other party. By the way, that trend seems to happen in Canada with premiers and the prime minister.
Across the globe. Yeah.
So is it Trump, Mr. Davis? How do you see Trump playing in the...
Well, I think Republicans have they do have some advantages. Number one, the way the House districts are drawn is to the Republicans' advantage, and Democrats have to overperform.
Thanks in part to a wave in 2010.
Correct. And the way the lines are drawn. And also, look, we put it this way.
With the census, and then, I mean,
Yeah.
that's we're going to have to look at that.
Also, Democrats live on top of each other. There are 21 districts where the Democratic presidential candidate got over 80% of the vote. I think there are 3 Republican districts. They tend to live on top of each other. But really, the best Democratic strategy is a massive relocation program because they're stacked up on top of each other in these cities. Secondly, I'd like to say that if you live in a county with a Whole Foods, it probably voted for Clinton. If you live in a county with a Cracker Barrel, it probably voted for Trump. And I think that still holds.
Absolutely.
Now, we said this one place, and the lady says, "Don't you mean Crate and Barrel?" And I said, I rest my case. I mean...
No, but I mean, the whole elitist thing is absolutely true. There's no question about it.
And look, on this immigration issue, this was really working for the Democrats 2 months ago because the Trump immigration policies were ripping children from their mother's arms. Now it's this cascade, this caravan of 10,000 people trying to march into the United States of who knows what. It's a different narrative on that issue. And if you look at it, that's probably working more for the Republicans now than it did before.
Particularly in the southern region. I'm not sure how much it will resonate in the Great Lakes region. I don't know that. But I tend to think it's not going to hurt the Republicans, that's for sure.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't put it past them to call out the troops and do some cheap theater shortly before the election.
Well, Jim, the good news is the caravan doesn't arrive till after the election.
Perfect timing. I'm not so sure he won't call out the troops and engage in cheap theater. All right.
But when you talk
for the record, folks,
when you talk about those southern states, it's those critical elections for Senate that are in Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Mississippi, Tennessee.
Yes.
Where it could have a profound effect.
Yes.
Ms. Burkle, why is the pink wave? Why did it leave why are the Republican women left out of that?
Because I don't think the Republican women are single issue voters. I think they're not single issue. I think that the economy, health care, there's a whole lot of issues.
I'm talking about candidates. In other words, you mentioned when you ran in 10.
First woman, yes.
You were the first woman to run in the district. That it seemed to be sort of a barrier to your getting involved. I think there's of the women, the year of the woman, the candidates running, there's maybe only 2 or 3 Republican women that have a shot at taking.
I was just reading about the race, 27th Ileana Ross-Layton, her district, Shalala, and the Republican there. Shalala should have put it away, but this,
right.
I'm trying to think of her name.
She's
it's very close, neck and neck.
Yeah.
That's right. She was a newscaster.
Popular newscaster.
So I don't know if I agree with that premise that the pink wave.
But
you are getting more Republican women. You're going to probably have a Republican woman senator in Tennessee for the first time. You may get one in Arizona, but it's more incremental. With the Democrats, it's a significant one.
And I've not done a side by side, but you could pick up a pink seat in the Senate with Marsha Blackburn.
Right.
Yeah. And that was a Quaker seat. So,
when I was elected governor in Michigan in 1982, I ran even with men and 20 points ahead among women. And that trend for Democrats is expanding.
Look how cute.
The same is true of Mario Cuomo, Michael Dukakis, Bill Clinton, Bob Kerrey. We were all elected in this. Dick Celeste, we were all elected in that. Tony Earl in that election. 20 points ahead.
But you've got the same gender gap today on the congressional generic ballot question.
Right.
It's at least 20 points.
Except
Well, I think it's
really
going to be
are-
greater.
Women are really.
Well, let me add this. It showed, the polls last time showed that, and on election day, it came much narrower. Trump
Yes.
actually carried white women. So be careful what you see in the pollings on these samples.
No,
the hardest
women-
thing in polling is figuring out who's going to show up on election day. And if you
Yes.
went back 2 months ago, it looked everything like a Democratic wave because of the intensity we saw on the one side and the complacency on the other. As that evens up, this thing gets a little bit tighter. You probably have today, as we speak, probably 30 or 40 races that are close to margin of error races that on the razor's edge could really move with a significant event in the next 2 weeks. That's what makes this hard to predict. It could be a really good night for Democrats if somehow there's a Republican mistake somewhere along the line that galvanizes voters. Because in a lot of these districts where Republicans are leading, a 3-point flip can
Make
flip
all
things
the
quick. So
difference, yeah.
there's still a long way to go. I'm a campaign chairman. I've seen races move 16, 20 points in a week. Given major events sometimes. And then your whole years of planning and campaigning's out the tube because of some tweet or something like that.
I.e. Citizens
I will
United.
say,
who
though,
knows?
because you just mentioned the tweet, I do think the media has played into all of this because they have just cried wolf so many times and they've just been in a panic about all of these, whether it's a tweet, a speech, or whatever it is the president is doing, and they're constantly reacting to that. And I think the Americans are kind of like, whoa. And then the message is getting diluted. And we haven't had an Armageddon,
Sure. I thought you were
per
going to say
per
we were
all
going
of
to
their.
panic about getting it wrong, which I think we are. People in my industry are very concerned about getting it wrong a second time.
The other thing, the chairman and I were talking earlier, you've got states in which 60% of the vote will be cast in early voting.
That's right.
Nevada certainly, Florida, others. So if there's a late event, it may be too late to change a lot of votes.
And it's I divide my time between Michigan and Washington. Very hard to analyze things here in Washington or by just watching the cable TV. Very hard.
Oh, this
So-
is
And I agree. I think 2 weeks is nowadays with the way
It-
politics
it- yeah,
is
it's
a light year. I mean, boom.
yeah,
So let's move beyond the
anything-
election for a
anything
second
can
before we go to
10
questions.
days is 10 hours can be a lot.
It's just
Governor Blanchard talked about it. Let's move beyond the election before we're going to go to questions in a few minutes. But I want to get to my, the wave crashes and then so what? So did being the beneficiary of a wave, if you think back on it, did it change in any way what you got to do in Congress, at least in that
Well,
first
let me just say,
term?
I'll just speak first. That for our class in '94, we had the contract for America.
It was called the contract with America.
Yeah,
by the way.
but I was just I was overcorrecting. I was overcorrecting, Martin. But of course, we moved a lot of
Yes,
product through the House, some through the Senate. But you have a mandate. You feel when you get a wave, you have a mandate to do things. And that's when things get started. And traditionally what happens are parties overreact to their mandates. In 2010, Republicans seemed to think they had a mandate. And I kept saying, guys, they voted us out in 2006. They voted us out again in 2008. They're just putting you in as a check against them. You don't have any mandate to do anything.
Is that what you felt?
Except putting a check on the president at this
Well,
point.
the fact that we had a Democratic Senate really was the check. That was the only check we needed because we voted on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Boehner and Cantor, just day after day we vote on 10, 12, 15 bills, and none of it went anywhere. So I'm not sure what that exercise was all about.
When we came in as
Just giving you bad votes.
Exactly
in a
right. They
swing
created
district
a
is what
record.
it's about.
Yeah, exactly right.
the year of the woman, there were 24 new women came in, and we did think that we had to we didn't know what we were doing, but we thought that we had to make a difference. Family and medical leave had been on the back burner. We knew that we could make sure that that was the kind of conversation that we should have, and we did. The assault weapons ban. We knew that was, and it was also a lot of the things that were given to us were the things that we could somehow create into the family issues. So we knew that that was important. And we were talking about this earlier, that although it certainly, that the vote.
The vote.
The vote.
Tell us about the vote.
Tell us about the
because not
vote.
everybody was here for the vote 20 years ago.
It's called the vote. It's just, it's,
Yeah, right. Were most of you alive?
I was up, I watched.
Did you?
I was up in the gallery, I looked down. So, the vote, tell us about the vote.
Well, no, but I mean, in answer to the question, when we got there, we were brought in by Clinton, and one of the things that I thought was important was this omnibus budget that was very important to his doing what he wanted to do. It had been, as you can well imagine, it had been presented as a tax increase, not a deficit reduction.
Right.
And as I said before, I represented a Republican district. And so...
You were the deciding vote.
I was the deciding vote.
She was the deciding vote. She could march down the aisle, handed in the card.
It wasn't quite... but
It was pretty dramatic. And then, because it was too late to vote electronically, so you had to hand in a card, and they announced...
Well, the president, I talked to the president, and I said I would only be your 218th vote. I knew that there had been 2 votes like that in history. You know what they are, don't you? You're so boring. You know what they are.
You felt safe saying that, right? Because it's never one vote.
So,
the impeachment of Andrew Johnson and the draft. There had been 2 votes like that in history. So I did. I mean, I didn't feel... And our leadership... chairpersons of committees were voting against it, and I stood there. His representative in Congress, Ray Thornton, was I can't vote against a 4.3 cent a gallon gasoline tax. Ray, I was just stunned that and dumb that people were not understanding how important his having gotten us there was. So yes, I was.
So she cast the vote, and it's a different meaning of the word wave, because
right.
it wasn't a wave election, but it was really quite. It was one of the. It was kind of a big marker for the decline of civility in Congress, I have to say.
I can remember
because all the Republicans,
Bob Walker,
they all started waving and shout and chanting.
Bye, Margie, right?
Goodbye, Marjorie.
And Bob Walker,
Goodbye, Marjorie.
who was jumping up and down saying bye-bye. Now, he was right. He was a bit of a jerk, and he was a phenomenal jumper. But I mean, I was standing there saying, no, this is crazy.
But Marjorie, let me make a point. If you can't go to Congress and make a tough vote and prepared to lose your seat over making a tough vote, why are you there? And I've seen this time and time again. And you shouldn't be ashamed of it. I wouldn't have voted the same way, but you shouldn't be. You should be proud of the fact you stood up and you stood for something.
Yeah.
I am tired of these guys who are just safe. They don't want to take a tough vote on anything, and so nothing gets done. Why are you there if you can't take? I whipped for TARP, the troubled asset, very unpopular vote. I remember getting a member in the back room saying, "Man, I hope this thing passes." I said, "Oh, great, we had you down as no." He said, "Well, I'm not voting for it." I said, "Well, you just told me you hoped it passes." "Yeah, it's got to pass, Davis." "Well, why can't you vote?" "Well, my constituent, I could never explain this, Davis. You vote for it. I'm not going to do it." It lost the first time. The markets went down 700 points in a matter of minutes.
Yep.
Right.
We brought it back. But I just said, you think this job's that great? What do you like, the parking? I mean, what is so great? I mean, if you can't come here to take a tough vote when you know it's the right thing to do, what are you doing here? You're here for the wrong reasons. So I have a lot of admiration for people. That will
I always
stand up
admired you. You don't have to apologize for doing the
No,
right
I mean,
thing.
I didn't think that it was not the right thing to do. I thought
understand. You thought
Yeah,
that was your
somebody
job.
else could do it.
Yeah,
but that's
crying out loud.
you already described yourself as naive. So, but it was a great thing. And by the way, the Clinton Economic Recovery Program led to 23 million new jobs, a balanced budget.
And it helped elect me. So it's all that.
There you go.
Oh, we actually had a budget surplus under Bill Clinton. Now, the Republicans could say they helped. Fine. We had a budget surplus when Bill Clinton left office, and 23 million new jobs, rising middle class incomes. Wow, what a record!
That's
And you
because
helped.
Tom Davis.
You helped.
No. I'm perfect, but still.
But he wasn't. But he wasn't able to pass it along to. There was no wave in 2000. Obviously, it was the antithesis of a wave when he left office.
Well, but after 8 years, they're ready for the next party.
And then 2002, the Republicans gain.
We
seats.
did. We
You
picked
did,
up,
right?
and I was campaign chairman that year. It was an off year. I had held the House in 2000 when every pundit in this town thought we were going to lose the House. We had a lot of open seats. We were on the defensive. If you remember, we lost the election until it went to the Supreme Court. The popular vote went with Al Gore, and we still held the House. At the time, the Senate went down a couple months later when Jeffords walked across the aisle. But I held the House, and it was quite an accomplishment. We beat expectations, and they said, will you do it again?
Sure.
And I said, I'm going to put this reputation on the line in a midterm with my president. But we picked up 8 seats. And there were a lot of reasons for that. One is in the redistricting, where we had a say. Instead of overreaching, we solidified, we took seats off the table.
So did you use the mandate? That's what I want. I want to do this mandate thing before we go to questions. Were you able, so that these gains, right? We spent all this time covering politics and wondering about politics, about who's going to, how big's the wave going to be, who's going to get the advantage. But to what end? I mean, do these big wins, I mean, Mr. Governor Blanchard, when you came in and when the Watergate class, you guys did some internal reforms, right? But it didn't
a lot of internal reforms, and there was a book written by our class called The Class of 74 that came out a year ago.
So what, yeah.
But what did we do? It's interesting. Not a lot of major legislative reforms, but we did rescue New York City, and the critics said they'll never recover. They've lived their life the wrong way. They have unions and minorities. They can't possibly make it. And look how prosperous New York City is today. We rescued Chrysler, which they said would never make it. That elected me governor because I led the fight. But we didn't. That was my life, dealing with those. So we did a lot of stuff, but nothing like Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, for that matter, Social Security.
You did prescription drugs, I guess, the Republicans.
We did Part D, and that was a 1-vote margin.
That was
on Medicare Part D, a 3-hour vote on the House floor,
Right.
which was longer than yours. Yeah, we did that. We did welfare reform. Had to pass it 3 times before President Clinton signed it. But you got to go through the dance with your base before you get something you can sign. And we also contributed. We had a balanced budget act. I was there for the signing with John Kasich and Newt and President Clinton.
Penny Kasich.
It started out as Penny, and frankly, I mean, what you did also helped on that. I mean, it was accumulation of a lot of things, and a hot .com, or we call it the .bomb economy, that went with that. But I think we made a difference. I left Congress simply because I was termed out as a committee chairman. I had a rapid rise, and we weren't doing anything. And let me just make this point. Today, the new governance model is you rule by executive order and regulation, and then you have the courts uphold it. And the Senate is critical to getting the regulatory and the sub-cabinet positions and the courts in place, but nothing's happened legislatively, except when you get a landslide like you did, like Obama did in 2008, where they had 60 votes in the Senate. But because it takes 60 votes in the Senate to do most things, it's just impossible to get. And so
it's a broken branch.
Yeah.
The Senate is a broken branch. Everybody knows it, and they made themselves look like first-class fools recently. It's a shame.
Spoken like a true House guy, but I agree with that.
Well, John Duggal used to say, the Senate is a place where good legislation goes to die.
There you
Yeah,
go.
but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
But Tom, you raised an important point, and that is the House giving up, acquiescing some of the House has done that in terms of its power to the regulatory, to the executive branch. They're not doing what they should be doing, and so you've got essentially the regulatory,
this is good.
exactly right, doing what the House should be doing.
And look at even on the war powers. We've punted on that. We refused after the Iraq War. Members felt burnt on that. They haven't touched anything else. They didn't touch ISIS. They won't touch that. They let the president move ahead where they're free to criticize if something goes wrong as opposed to owning it.
How did you get along with Bill Clinton?
We talked about this a little. I mean, when I wasn't impeaching him, we got along.
What a guy.
He was.
Yeah.
Let me just say, I probably had better relations with him as people than with the Bush people. They were really good at their outreach. He was personally very, very good on these issues.
And he's such a charm.
I wrote a lot of law with him because I chaired the District of Columbia subcommittee. We wrote the control board together with Alice Rivlin. We did a lot of work together. He had a very professional group around him. When you shut the doors, the politics went out, and it was how do we get this done?
One of the smartest presidents.
Well, he also had some very good policy folks around him that once you could get outside the noise of the of the dance, they were very good and easy to work with. So the answer is And Clinton was the kind of politician that you could vote to impeach him one day or something, and the next day he'd sign your bill.
And he honestly, as a politician, was very forgiving. I mean, he,
Well, he appointed me ambassador, so I must tell you, I love it. He was a very good judge of character.
So we have about 25 minutes for questions. If you have, we'll keep chatting if nobody wants to ask questions. But I hope you all do want to ask questions. Again, please go to the mics to ask your questions. And I think I see somebody jumping at the opportunity.
Yeah. Thanks for all your presentation. My name is Li Yang. When it comes to the election, I always think our society has to go to improve somewhat to benefit the general public, especially them now that's poor and indigent. Somehow, I don't think they can turn around unless elected officials do something about it, because the legislation is so important and their power is so important to get rid of the abuse and maybe misconduct and things like that. But currently, the elected official is supported by those abuse of power, and good candidate, their resources will be all victimized and taken away, deprived of, and even sent to jail, and their reputation is totally ruined.
Sorry, what your question is?
My question is that we want to have a good election. So how are we going to really improve the system, the election process? I think if you say the wave is usually manipulated by those lobby interest groups.
Manipulated by the interest groups. Okay. Well, this sort of goes back to what I wanted to ask from the start. Is the wave part of the thing about the wave election? I think there's sort of a connotation that it's a surprise. But there are no surprises in American politics anymore, are there?
Well, there was
Yeah,
in
2016, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, okay, there you go.
Every punt, it was going to be the coronation of President Clinton, and it didn't work. Voters have a way of telling politicians when they think things are going the wrong way or things aren't going exactly maybe the way we think they are in Washington. And that happened in 2016. They make a correction. Right. At times when Congresses are elected and move rapidly for change, there's usually a pullback afterwards.
And I think that was 2010. I think
Certainly
so
1966.
many things in that
after
first term
the
of President
64 and
Obama.
everything.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
so,
I follow that one
and with
closely.
let me just give you a global concept. With the rapidity of change in the world today, both culturally and economically, there is disruption, obviously, in the economic community, but there's disruption in the political side. Macron was a third party in France. You have a five-star movement coalition in Italy. I mean, you have Brexit. I mean, it's across the globe. Brazil's about to elect, going in a different direction. In the rest of the world, this has been expressed in many cases with third and fourth parties springing up as new challenges are introduced.
And almost impossible to read.
Whether it's immigration, whether it's immigration, whether it's globalization, whether it's wealth disparity, climate change. But in the United States, to date, it's been absorbed within a two-party system. And what's happened, it's moved the parties away, the center is gone. Republicans have moved right, Democrats have moved left. I think they're about to, this is my opinion, about to move more left. We had a Tea Party, they got a herbal Tea Party. So it's the kind of thing it's moving away. Had Hillary Clinton stayed centered and not gone left, but she was trying to hold the Sanders people, and she said, I think it would have been a different election.
Absolutely.
But a lot of Republicans like myself are saying, give me something.
Right.
But then she denounces the trade agreements and everything else.
I'm not so sure. You know, when I looked at 2016 and I was working with Hillary in Michigan, I knew, look, we'd had a Democratic president for 8 years. The underlying climate was for change.
Right.
Change. People say, oh, well, she was a flawed candidate. Well, she only won by 3 million. She was flawed. Think about Trump being flawed. But the underlying was for change, and there was a belief that things weren't working right in Washington. And she was kind of running as a third term of Obama, but not. And I agree that Bernie damaged her in the primary. I think he did, just as Ralph Nader, third party, cost Gore the presidency.
No question.
All right, Ross Perot did not help George H.W. Bush in '92. So there have been these kind of movements. I think a lot of our candidates, Tom, really are more moderate. I do. But if I were a Republican, I'd be out saying they're all left, or whatever you're saying. I think they're more moderate.
I think you do, but I think you're starting to undergo. President Obama kind of held a lid on things.
True.
As he goes away, I think you're finding that the glue that held that coalition together is becoming unglued, particularly in some of these urban constituencies. Let me just give you one factoid.
Yes, I agree with
Of the 30 top-performing Democratic districts in the House by presidential, not one will be represented by a white male in the next Congress. I know you like that. That's not an indictment. It's just a statement of the party's identity politics and where it is taking it off in some of these different directions.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Good evening, and thank you for being here tonight. With 1 week left in October, do you believe that we've seen the October surprise, or do you think there's still more time for the pollsters to get flipped on their heads?
I think, who knows?
Hard to read, I think.
We don't know. As Governor Blanchard was saying, I think we've all said 2 weeks is an eternity in this business. 2 weeks is an eternity. Trump has had a few good weeks getting a trade agreement with Canada and Mexico in line, having the economic numbers where they are has, I think, helped his numbers and in a way helped the Republican candidates. That's not a surprise, but it's certainly different than where it was a month ago. But 2 weeks, who knows? Anything can happen.
I was born on a sunny day. So I would like to say that I think what will surprise you is what's happening with women and their enthusiasm, and especially with down-ballot races. I think you'll see something that's quite extraordinary, and it's just the beginning, but,
So about October surprise, I think, John, you made an excellent point
but
about
I think that's going to be part of it.
About this early voting thing, though, that I think is, and I would love to know some statistics after the election about just comparing the early vote in some of these key races versus the overall vote, and is it really just a microcosm, or because October surprise is going to start having to be the end of September surprise if it really wants to.
Well, we're seeing it in Alaska.
The other answer I would offer is that yes, 2 weeks is an eternity where things can change on a dime, except for the votes that have already been cast. But on the other hand, if you look at people who should be turning on Trump, the soybean farmers, the corn farmers, the workers in a nail factory in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, who are being laid off because of the tariffs on Mexican steel, all of them are still saying, but I'm still for him. I think he's right. Read one soybean farmer say the other day, this continues for another year or two, I may have to rethink this. But while I think it's absolutely true what everyone has said about it can turn on a dime, it also takes time for some of these things to sink in. An argument could be made that voters did not vote their economic self-interest in some cases.
They haven't been doing that for years.
They may return to that, but it may take some economic pain before they do.
Right.
So absent some cataclysmic event, and heaven knows they can happen, I'm not looking for a further surprise, particularly given the votes that are cast.
I think the independent voters are going to go measurably for Democrats, including independents who've historically leaned Republican. And the reason is they feel there's something fundamentally wrong with the mood, the attitude, and the governing activities of Trump being very, very divisive. I've had a lot of people I know who are Republican come up and say, but they're moderate Republicans, I will admit. I've had it. I'm going to vote for the Democrats. Didn't even ask me who they were. I want you to know I've had it.
But I think there's other folks.
Republicans no longer exist.
I think there are other folks who will say, I'm going to separate this guy and his personality from what he's done in the last 2 years.
Sure.
And so they will vote for him, maybe even to your point out in Missouri, and whether you're in steel or you're in mining, there's a whole lot of people who are really delighted with what he's done, and he's put he's keeps saying I'm putting this country first, and a lot of Americans like that message, and I think they will.
His job approval ratings are much better than his personal approval ratings.
Exactly
I think we get those mixed up sometimes, given the state of the economy and some of these other issues. So we don't know where it's going. But
I don't want to go down the President Trump rabbit hole too much, but in history, Is that a wider gap than with most presidents, you think? In other words, with Reagan, was there, I assume it was the same. With Nixon, it was the same. Where maybe with Bill Clinton, it wasn't. The dissonance between the disapproval of him as a person, but the approval of him as president. I'm going to have to guess at a record.
Mr. Chairman, you can correct this. I would bet Reagan's personal favorability was higher than his job approval.
Yes, I'm going to guess so too.
In fact, it usually is that way. It was that way with Obama. This is kind of the reverse. That's my point.
Right.
And how independents react. Let me give you one other fact. The last 3 times a party has come up for a midterm election and controls the presidency, the House, and the Senate was 1994, 2006, and 2010. Mm-hmm. Each time, the president's party got punished on Election Day more than the pundits thought.
Yeah.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's going to happen again, but I think we need to be aware of that historical fact. And as a Republican, I'm sitting there saying, what are we missing? It's not always picked up in the polls.
I think independent voters will be the difference here. I really do. Because I agree, the Republicans who bid for him are for him, period. And the Democrats, will be against him no matter what he does at this point after what he's done. So,
Sir, you're up.
All right. Thank you for taking questions. Assuming that the Democrats do win back the House in a couple weeks, it seems likely that they won't be able to accomplish everything they're campaigning on, given the Republican Senate and presidency. Do you think that potential lack of accomplishments could hurt Democratic enthusiasm in 2020 and therefore prospects for winning back the Senate or the White House?
Excellent question.
Can I take, as a Republican, let me just take first stab at that, if it's okay, because we went through this on the Republican side with Obama. Republicans took the House in 2010, and we had a group of Republicans that were really upset that, what are you guys doing? You aren't moving fast enough. We had a whole wing of the party up there that the speaker'd call one play and they'd call another play at the line of scrimmage. We went through this thing, and we looked pretty dysfunctional. We didn't win back the presidency. So I think that there is a concern. I mean, the good news for Democrats is if they take the House, they will have investigative powers. They will probably look underneath the hood on some of these issues that right now Republicans are protecting their quarterback. Democrats want to sack the quarterback.
And we don't know what's going to happen.
And that changes.
With the investigation.
But yeah, let me just say this. I'd be interested in your reactions. Is right now 3/4 of Democratic, self-identified Democrats believe the president should be impeached. This is before Robert Mueller comes out of his report. Now, I think it's unlikely to be a whitewash on this. It's more likely to add fuel to the fire. If the Democrats don't move on impeachment and have to go back to their primaries a year and a half from now, how do they react to that? And that's something I think we'll see how that generates. What is MSNBC? What is the blogs? How does this move? If I were them, I wouldn't say a thing until you see what Robert Mueller has to say.
I mean, we've got to wait.
But let's understand the macro pressures that will be on these members when you already have a very rabid constituency right now that's electing you not just to stop Trump, but to remove him.
Was it Lincoln that said, I'm not a member of an organized political party, I'm a Democrat?
that was
Will Rogers.
Rogers. All right, I stand corrected. But nonetheless, it was an insightful person who understood Democrats. Yeah. Democrats, and I speak as one, we often can't get out of our own way. We have a leadership of the House. The 3 senior members will all turn 80 in the next Congress. If we go, I take the chairman's point well. I don't know how the Democrats go back to the voters not having pursued impeachment, and I think it's suicidal if they do.
But it's way too early.
I disagree with that. I think the kinds of people going to get elected, and a lot of them in marginal seats, are practical people. And they know that unless the Senate were to change dramatically or things changed substantially, there's no chance of an impeachment being successful. I mean, in the House it could be. But I do agree, there'll be investigations. When you let Adam Schiff become chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, if I were Donald Trump, I'd worry about that more than anything. I do. And I think the elephant in the room is Robert Mueller.
Absolutely.
And what happens there. I happen to think some pretty incredible things are going to unfold, and I'm glad he's waiting till after the election to deal with it. And if I were Donald Trump, I wouldn't be able to sleep. It's just that I'm not sure he has much of a conscience.
But if you were Donald Trump, wouldn't you want to co-opt the this new narrow Democratic House majority
Sure.
as fast as possible to get a bunch of things?
What I would do is I'd roll out an infrastructure plan. The Democrats, that's what he should have done to start with. The Democrats should have it ready for him and roll it out and do something. That put people to work, build our society, have something of value left over other than $1 trillion deficit this year. It's unbelievable.
I think Democrats, and I think they're doing
yes,
it.
but think
Am
about
I
8 years
partisan?
with
Do you think
President No, you're not partisan at all.
No,
Yes,
but
sir.
I think they've got to hold their fire, and and I think they are. I don't think they're talking about impeachment until after Mueller.
Well, they won't, because Republicans talked about it in '98 and it came back to bite us.
Yeah.
Because it would awaken the Trump-centric voters very quickly if people besides Maxine Waters, who talks about it every time she speaks, went up and did it. But I do think this, and when Mueller's report comes out, I have no idea what's in it. I think he's run a pretty leak-proof operation on this. But I just can't believe it's going to be helpful to the president. And just think of it this way. If the Democratic base wants him out now, when you get this additional information, how do you as Democratic leaders resist this? You may have some marginal members here, but Jerry Nadler, who I have a high regard for, who is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has got to go back to the Upper West Side and to Greenwich Village, and they're going to say, why did we elect you, Jerry? And
Right,
you're going
and
to see
hold that
you're going to see
consistency,
primaries all over the place if they don't. That's my judgment.
Let me give you my crystal ball. So he comes in, and there's indictments of the family, and there's the report that says money laundered from Russia saved all of his properties, not just once, but 2 or 3 times. And there's a real case for a criminal activity, but that's not the remedy with the president. So let's say then the House goes forward and passes a bill of impeachment, and it goes to the Senate. But you're reading headlines, indictments, criminal, money laundering, all this stuff. Now the senators have to vote on this. Today, not even a chance, not a chance. But they all have to walk the plank on that issue. And all of a sudden now, 2 years from now, the Republicans, their seats are going to be up for election. So things can change.
Remember with Nixon, I mean,
Things could change.
Well, the economy changes, it changes the whole
But I don't think
dynamic.
there's any mileage in running for office saying you're going to impeach
No,
them.
I agree.
see any mileage.
No, I agree with you. I'm looking ahead.
The American people don't. They're sick of it. They're sick of all this
You think he's-
craziness that's gone on for 2 years.
You think he's
All they want-
immunized himself with the public,
I
no
do.
matter
I
what?
think the guy
Well, he
is
certainly has with the
unbelievably
base.
like Teflon. Nothing has gotten to him.
All he's got to do is get that gun and go to
Folks-
down Fifth Avenue.
For 3/4 of these
I can shoot
members,
somebody on Fifth Avenue.
for 3/4 of these members, the only race that counts is the primary election.
That's
The
right.
general election is just a constitutional formality. And I am telling you,
primaries, that's right.
Democratic members, the vast majority, are going to be looking over their left shoulder when this Mueller report comes out. I just think the pressure on them is going to be enormous. You heard it here. I'll stand by it.
We probably have time to get both of these people who have been waiting patiently. Yes, sir.
Thank you for a delightful evening. You've been talking about the Republicans going to the right and the Democrats going to the left, and this large independent group with the craziness going on. Is there the possibility of either more independent candidates or a third party being formed?
Well, look, Macron was a centrist third party in France, but they have a different system. The difficulty here is if nobody gets a majority of the electoral votes, it goes to the House, which would be a partisan shootout with each state. California gets the same vote as Wyoming. So, I wouldn't be shocked if you had a strong candidate up the middle, but their chances of winning with our rules, I think, are pretty slim.
Don't see it, and I don't think independents are going to fare well. They will have an effect. The independent candidate for governor of Kansas, huge debate going on, whose votes he's going to take.
Take away from, exactly.
He's not
Which
going to
side?
win,
Yeah.
but he's certainly going to affect that outcome. You just had the independent governor of Alaska withdraw, although he'll stay on the ballot.
And early voters have already voted for him.
Exactly.
Right.
Taken from each side.
I'm with the chairman. The machinery isn't there. If it were, we'd be talking about President Perot.
Yeah,
I think the
exactly.
dissatisfaction out there in the land, including a lot of my friends, makes it ripe for a third party. It's just that I don't see it succeeding in electing a president. A bellwether of that is a guy who could run as independent, credibly, is Michael Bloomberg.
Yes.
And he's decided to register as a Democrat.
Re-register.
Is that right?
Yeah,
He
he's
was.
been,
He
he's
He was
been
the
back and forth.
Republican mayor of New
Back and
York.
forth.
Used to be,
little
yeah.
bit.
But no, but he was
Well,
at one point.
well,
he was
Trump
the
did it 7 times.
Exactly.
So,
That's the new model.
it's New York, right?
By the way, Churchill did it a number of times too. So just
What
That's
was his
true.
line? It doesn't take a lot of talent to rat, but it does take a lot of talent to re-rat.
Yes.
Last but not least, many of us are super concerned about all the voter suppression that's happening around the country in Georgia and other places. What impact do you see that having in close races around the country?
It helps energize people to want to vote who think they're the targets of suppression, actually.
I agree with that. I do.
I don't
think,
like it. I think it's a calculated move by Republicans. But nevertheless.
I maybe as mail-in ballots are calculated for Democrats to work for their electoral models, but I don't know anybody that can't vote that wants to vote. I don't think anybody's being denied that. Even under the Georgia rules, you can go in and vote and just prove you're who you say you are, and he was complying with a state law. So I think that the governor's right that they use this to hype it up, and sometimes these things blow up when you do it because it lets people think they're trying to take their ballot away.
Can you believe that the press would do
But
anything like
I
that?
think it is. I shouldn't say this, but I think it's probably a little bit overhyped, and Republicans, when they do these kind of things, give Democrats an opportunity to do that, and Democrats take advantage of that.
In Michigan, the Republicans passed a law prohibiting straight ticket voting, which we've had forever. So it'll be interesting to see. I think eventually that's going to get changed back, but it'll be interesting to see what effect that has on the elections. And I think
It
it
will
will actually
energize
help.
some communities, though.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing because it leads to long lines and people get discouraged. But I think it will actually help women candidates because you'll have to go each race. And I think it will actually, in that sense, help.
Might.
And Texas has just gone to straight ticket balloting, which I think when you're doing polling on the Senate race, there are a lot more Republicans than Democrats in Texas. So Cruz probably overperforms the polling because they can come in and push one button. But we'll see. I mean, that has to be determined.
I think the single biggest thing the talking heads are missing about the Cruz race is the margin by which Abbott and Patrick and the Attorney General are going to be reelected in Texas and will help carry Cruz with that
With the
straight
one
ticket.
button.
With the
Yeah,
one button.
one button.
Did any of the four of you ever believe that fraudulent voting was in any way important in any race you ever ran?
No.
We had a couple races in Fairfax way back, and we've had a history in Southwest Virginia of races actually being stolen. I think modest voter ID laws are appropriate. I don't have a problem with them. I think the Republicans we've tended to overdo it sometimes. But I think those laws are great protections because if you don't have those guardrails up, people are going to abuse them. And we know, I've talked to members from some of these places where they go back and look at these registrations that come in before the election, and the people are registering out of hotels, and they're gone after the election. Now, maybe they were there for the month and stayed, and they were legitimate, but there's nobody there to investigate them. Most of these are in urban areas where your district attorneys are Democrats anyway, and they're just not going to get investigated. So I don't think we will really have a total story on how. I don't think it's as widespread as a lot of people think it is, but I think if nobody's looking, you're going to get more bad behavior, and we've seen that in Virginia from time to time.
I think
No
Tom's got a
question,
point.
historically, it has happened. I refer you to Robert Cairo's book on Lyndon Johnson.
Right.
We had, in 2012, we had Hurricane Sandy. You talk about variables in an election, how quickly it can change. And so they said the Syracuse University students could vote. So they could, anyone could vote wherever they were in the state. So Syracuse University students who are not from the area, for most part of the part, went and they voted locally. So it was such a skewed election, and that I do think. I don't say it was voter fraud, but it just was this.
Well, I got to tell Governor Scott about that.
Element
I mean, I think he could.
This
when you look at
element,
the panhandle and all this.
I haven't heard any instance of voter fraud in Michigan. I've always worried about computer hacking and manipulation. I've worried about that, but I haven't heard of any instance, with the exception of people voting in two different places but not thinking it's wrong. And that tends to be people who maybe live in Michigan and then Florida or in Illinois, or they have a place in Florida and they have a place in Michigan, they have a place in Arizona, whatever, And they vote in both places because they own property and they think they're entitled to do that.
Right.
So I think if we're going to look at fraud, we need to look at unintentionally people in good faith voting in two different states, thinking they're entitled to it because they own property and they spend half their time there.
And if it's not a presidential election, I guess it's really not a contradiction. If it's a presidential election, you get 2 votes. That's clearly a violation.
Well, and they probably wouldn't do that. But they might be voting for mayor in Naples, Florida, and then Senate in Michigan.
Final question. I'm going to write these. I'm going to write your answers down and stick them in a drawer. So the turnout in the last midterm election was, I believe, it was 35.4%, which was the lowest turnout in a midterm since 1942.
I think it's going to be
What
higher.
will the turnout? Yeah. What will the turnout be in this midterm election? The last one was 35.
48.3.
Well, it'll be higher. I don't want it to be that high, but I'd say low 40s.
Yeah.
What was it the last time?
35.
I'd say 45. I don't know.
I'm going to go with 55. I think both sides are ginned up.
41.
All right. So
What's the
it's like
prize? What's the prize?
return engagement here. And
I don't think so. Are you still awake out there? I can hear you breathing.
I think this was terrific. Can we give these fellows a round of applause? Thank you. A reporter always wants to end the evening by saying, I learned a lot, and I learned a lot. So I hope you all did as well. Thank you for being here.
To say
yes,
one
sir.
thing.
Oh, that's right. So he
we
gets
have
the
a
final word.
world-renowned archivist, the archivist of the United States. You heard him start the program. In full disclosure, I happen to be chairman of the National Archives Foundation. This is a fabulous, fabulous house. We house all of our founding documents. We have regular exhibitions that are tremendous, like the one on Vietnam. We have one coming up on the women's right to vote in March. It's a great place to appreciate our wonderful country and the people that built it. And I know my colleagues are part of those that did their best to build it. So,
thank you. I promised
Thank
you I'd
you.
let you do that. So there you go. Thank you very much. Good night.
is that all right?
Good job. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a blast.